Absolutely, Chairman. I see this, and I don't mind calling them out, but Captain and Burkina Faso, as they know that both, whether it's their gold reserves, that is all those proceeds are just in exchange to protect the junta regime.
Burkina Faso just seized foreign-owned gold mines, banned raw gold exports, and built a refinery to keep every ounce of wealth at home while paying off billions in debt without Western help. Why would a small West African nation challenge the global financial system so boldly? And what does this mean for Africa and the West? Let's find that out. When the announcement came from Ouagadougou, it wasn't just another policy change. It was a seismic jolt to an entire economic order. Burkina Faso's military-led government revealed a package of actions that sounded more like a revolutionary manifesto than a budget statement. The immediate takeover of two major foreign-owned gold mines, the permanent ban on raw gold exports, and the launch of a fully operational national gold refinery capable of processing 150 tons a year. Added to this was an extraordinary revelation. The country had cleared its $4.7 billion external debt without touching a single loan from the IMF or World Bank. Western investors and governments were caught off guard. Mining executives, who had long operated with minimal interference, suddenly found their most lucrative licenses revoked and transferred to the newly formed state-run entity, Société de Participation Minière du Burkina, SOPA-MIB. Global commodity markets reacted instantly, with gold-related stocks dipping in Paris and Toronto, and risk assessments on West African investments spiking overnight. Diplomatic chatter from European capitals described the move as an economic coup, reflecting the deep unease in circles accustomed to calling the shots on African resources. But it wasn't just the corporate boardrooms or foreign ministries feeling the shock. Burkina Faso's decision to keep every ounce of gold within its borders and process it domestically signaled something even bigger. A rejection of a decades-old extraction model that saw African nations export raw resources cheaply and import expensive finished goods. For the first time, Burkina Faso wasn't simply adjusting economic policy. It was rewriting the rules of how its wealth would be used and who would benefit from it. The symbolism was equally potent. The unveiling of the new gold refinery wasn't just an industrial milestone. It was a national spectacle. Citizens gathered outside its gates, waving flags and singing as leaders promised a future where gold profits would fund local industries, infrastructure, and social programs instead of leaving the country in cargo planes bound for Europe. This refinery, one official declared, is more than a building, it is the turning of a page. International reactions reflected both disbelief and alarm. French media outlets, long accustomed to covering Burkina Faso in the context of aid and security challenges, suddenly had to explain how a country they often described as fragile had executed such a bold economic pivot. Canadian mining publications ran headlines like "West African gold no longer guaranteed," while think tanks warned of a contagion effect, as neighboring countries might be inspired to take similar steps. At home, however, the mood was celebratory. Citizens called it Independence Day 2.0, not because of any military victory, but because of the sense of reclaiming ownership over what many see as stolen wealth. Social media lit up with hashtags like "Our Gold," "Our Future," and local newspapers hailed the refinery as a symbol of true sovereignty. This wave of national pride, however, is only part of the story. The deeper question is why Traoré's government made these moves now, and why gold, in particular, was chosen as the first battleground in this economic revolt. Was it just about money? Or is there a deeper logic to striking at the heart of one of the world's most valuable commodities? To understand why Burkina Faso's first major act of economic defiance centered on gold, you have to understand what gold has meant to this land. For centuries, the region that is now Burkina Faso has been tied to gold. It fueled ancient trans-Saharan trade routes, drew colonial powers into the Sahel, and in the modern era became the country's top export, accounting for nearly 80% of foreign earnings. Yet despite this abundance, ordinary Burkinabés rarely saw the benefits. Gold wealth flowed outward, to Europe, Canada, and multinational shareholders, while leaving behind open pits, polluted rivers, and fragile communities still living on the edge of poverty. This imbalance is what Captain Ibrahim Traore's government decided to confront head-on. The choice to make gold the first target of its economic rebellion wasn't arbitrary. It was strategic. Gold was not only Burkina Faso's most valuable resource, but also the symbol of everything wrong with the old economic model. Foreign companies extracting raw materials cheaply, exporting them for refinement, and capturing almost all the added value. By striking first at gold, Traoré was challenging the single biggest lever of external control over the country's economy. Control meant more than just owning the mines. It meant controlling the entire gold cycle, from extraction to processing to reserves. That's why the government didn't stop at taking over two key mining operations. They moved quickly to ban the export of unprocessed ore, a direct hit to the established system that depended on cheap African raw material being sent abroad for high-value processing. This was an audacious move because it required building the capacity to refine the gold domestically, hence the push for a state-of-the-art national refinery. The logic behind this was simple but profound. Why should Burkina Faso sell its gold for a fraction of its value, only to buy back refined products at several times the price? By processing it at home, every ounce of value stays within the national economy, creating skilled jobs, developing local industries, and giving the government far more bargaining power in international markets. This shift effectively turns gold from a passive export into an active tool of national development. But there's another layer to this decision. Gold is a foundation for financial security. Gold is not just a commodity. It is a global store of value, a hedge against economic shocks, and a pillar of monetary systems. By controlling gold production and creating reserves, Burkina Faso is building a financial shield, something it has never had in its modern history. These reserves can back future currency policies, support trade deals, and serve as collateral for strategic investments that don't rely on Western loans or conditions. Traoré's team framed the move as a moral one as well as an economic one. For years, Burkinabe communities living near mining sites had been protesting the environmental damage and lack of benefit sharing from foreign-run operations. The new gold policy directly addresses those grievances, promising that profits will now be reinvested into agriculture, infrastructure, and education sectors long neglected under externally driven development models. Choosing gold first also sent a political signal across Africa. If a relatively small, landlocked nation can reclaim its most valuable resource and retool it for national benefit, so can others. And that's precisely what has Western observers worried, not just about the loss of a few lucrative mines, but about the possibility of a domino effect spreading across resource-rich African states. However, controlling gold was only one part of the equation. Traoré knew that as long as the country remained financially dependent on foreign lenders, even the boldest resource strategy could be undermined. That is why, after targeting gold, Burkina Faso turned its attention to something even more entrenched: the global financial system itself. Let's pause for a second to say, big thank you to the Black Culture Diary community, where Black voices, stories, and legacies are preserved and amplified. By becoming a member, you're not just supporting the channel, you're becoming part of a powerful cultural movement. Let's continue. Even with gold flowing through Burkinabe hands, the country could still be shackled by external debt and the conditions tied to it. For decades, Burkina Faso's economy, like that of many African nations, had been shaped not by local priorities, but by policies attached to loans from international financial institutions like the IMF and the World Bank. These loans often came with strings that demanded currency devaluation, privatization of state industries, or reductions in public spending, all in the name of reforms that rarely benefited ordinary citizens. Captain Ibrahim Traoré's administration recognized this trap early on. Without financial sovereignty, resource sovereignty would only be half a victory. The risk was clear. Even if gold profits were retained locally, they could easily be siphoned away to service debt or constrained by foreign-imposed economic directives. To break that cycle, Burkina Faso needed to sever its reliance on these institutions altogether. That is why, alongside its new resource policies, the government made an announcement that stunned global finance. It had cleared its entire $4.7 billion external debt without taking any new loans from the IMF or World Bank. This was unprecedented for a country of Burkina Faso's size and economic structure. Clearing such a debt typically takes decades, but Traoré's administration redirected revenues from newly secured mining operations and domestic resource management to pay it off quickly. In doing so, they eliminated one of the main levers historically used by external powers to influence policy. The decision was about more than just numbers. It was about reclaiming the right to set economic priorities free from foreign interference. In the past, IMF loan conditions had often forced Burkina Faso to slash agricultural subsidies or freeze public sector wages, triggering unrest and stalling development. Free from those conditionalities, the government could now channel funds into critical domestic sectors, modernizing agriculture, boosting manufacturing, and strengthening infrastructure, without asking permission from Washington or Brussels. This financial independence also dovetailed with the country's gold strategy. By stockpiling gold reserves and refusing to export raw ore, Burkina Faso could build a buffer against external economic shocks. Gold reserves are a form of financial insurance, providing a hedge against currency fluctuations and potential trade disruptions. They also offer leverage for future economic initiatives, including regional trade agreements that prioritize African markets over traditional Western partners. International reaction to this move was swift and divided. Some economists praised Burkina Faso for avoiding the so-called debt trap that has ensnared many developing nations. Others warned of potential isolation, suggesting that cutting ties with major financial institutions could limit foreign investment or access to emergency funding in times of crisis. Western financial media often framed the decision as risky populism, but within Africa, it was increasingly seen as a blueprint for true independence. Domestically, the impact was immediate and symbolic. Farmers and entrepreneurs alike spoke of new optimism, believing that policies could now focus on local development rather than meeting foreign debt obligations. Civil society groups hailed the move as the second phase of independence, economic independence, which had been long delayed since the colonial era. However, financial freedom also meant taking on new responsibilities. Without IMF safety nets, Burkina Faso would have to rely on its own fiscal discipline, revenue management, and crisis planning. This required not only bold leadership, but also regional cooperation, as no African country can stand entirely alone in today's interconnected economy. This brings us to the next chapter in the story, the regional and global ripple effects of Burkina Faso's revolt. Because once one country breaks free and succeeds, neighbors start wondering if they can do the same, and global powers start wondering how to stop it. Here's a reminder to please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on Black culture, history, civilization, and identity. Let's continue now. Burkina Faso's financial and resource independence did not happen quietly. It sent tremors across the African continent, where leaders and citizens alike had long grown tired of seeing their natural wealth flow outward while poverty and dependency persisted at home. When Traoré announced that Burkina Faso would no longer export raw gold or accept the usual debt packages from Western financial institutions, it was more than a national decision. It was a regional wake-up call. Neighboring countries began watching closely, especially those facing similar struggles. Mali and Niger, which had already undergone political transformations of their own, quickly recognized the significance of Burkina Faso's moves. Both nations share similar resource profiles and histories of foreign-dominated mining sectors. The sight of Burkina Faso paying off its debt while increasing control over its most valuable resource inspired debates in these countries about revisiting mining contracts, limiting raw exports, and exploring domestic refining. Some politicians openly suggested replicating Burkina Faso's approach, framing it as the new Sahelian model. The conversation wasn't limited to West Africa. Across the continent, from Guinea's bauxite mines to the copper belts of Zambia and the cobalt fields of the Democratic Republic of Congo, resource nationalism became a hot topic again. Leaders and civil society activists began openly questioning why so much of Africa's raw wealth is still left on the continent unprocessed, enriching others while leaving African economies vulnerable. Burkina Faso's defiance gave these voices credibility, proof that one country could take dramatic steps and still maintain stability. This growing interest sparked anxiety in Western capitals. Governments and corporations had long relied on predictable access to African resources, often under contract terms highly favorable to foreign investors. If more countries followed Burkina Faso's path, the cost of raw materials could rise, global supply chains could be disrupted, and decades of economic influence could be eroded. Reports surfaced of Western diplomats lobbying African leaders against copycat policies, warning of investor flight and reduced development funding. But these warnings seemed less persuasive in an era when many African nations were already questioning whether foreign investment had ever truly served them in the first place. The new alliances formed in response to Burkina Faso's shift also worried Western policymakers. Instead of seeking a compromise with old partners, Burkina Faso strengthened ties with countries willing to respect its new economic stance. Russian mining companies like Nordgold received exploration and refining contracts, while trade negotiations with Asian and Middle Eastern partners began focusing on infrastructure and technology transfers rather than raw resource extraction. This signaled a broader pivot. African nations are increasingly looking to one another and non-Western allies for economic cooperation, reducing reliance on Europe and North America. On the ground in Burkina Faso, this regional shift became a point of pride. Citizens saw their country not only taking control of its destiny, but also leading by example, inspiring others to reclaim what they viewed as long-denied sovereignty. Social media discussions across the Sahel echoed this sentiment, with hashtags like Africa for Africans trending as young activists celebrated what they called the Golden Rebellion. However, this wave of influence comes with a double-edged sword. A continent-wide movement toward resource nationalism could trigger resistance from powerful interests invested in maintaining the status quo. Economic sanctions, trade barriers, or political destabilization are all possible responses, especially if more countries decide to block raw exports or renegotiate contracts. For Burkina Faso, this means its revolution is not just about its future, but about whether it can withstand external pressure while others look to follow its lead. And that is the central question moving forward. Can Burkina Faso and its neighbors sustain this bold course without triggering backlash that undermines their progress? That question leads us to the final challenge: whether this economic rebellion can survive its success and deliver the future Burkinabe citizens have been promised. Burkina Faso's bold shift has captured global attention, but revolutions, especially economic ones, rarely unfold without turbulence. As the country moves deeper into uncharted territory, the question is no longer whether it can inspire others, but whether it can survive the consequences of its transformation. The first challenge lies in capacity. Managing state-owned mines and operating a world-class refinery demands technical expertise that Burkina Faso is still developing. Unlike foreign corporations with decades of experience, global networks, and deep capital reserves, Burkina Faso must build its knowledge base, train skilled workers, and establish international trade channels almost from scratch. This takes time and precision. Any mismanagement could lead to inefficiencies that weaken the very independence the nation fought to secure. Another risk comes from external pressure. The same Western powers, unsettled by Burkina Faso's policies, still hold considerable influence in global trade, finance, and diplomacy. The country's refusal to export raw gold and reliance on new, non-Western partners could trigger targeted economic measures, ranging from tighter trade restrictions to informal sanctions. Even subtle pressure, such as discouraging foreign banks from doing business with Burkina Faso, could limit access to essential financial services and technology. At home, political stability is critical. So far, Traoré's government has enjoyed strong public support, with citizens rallying behind the vision of economic sovereignty. But expectations are rising quickly. People are anticipating immediate improvements in jobs, infrastructure, and social programs funded by the gold strategy. If these benefits take too long to materialize or are unevenly distributed, frustration could grow, and the narrative of national pride could be overshadowed by discontent. This is a common trap for nations pursuing rapid transformation. The people's patience can run out faster than reforms can deliver results. Corruption is another lurking danger. State-run industries, especially those managing valuable resources, often attract opportunists seeking personal enrichment. Without strict oversight, transparency, and institutional reforms, there is a risk that the very wealth meant to empower the nation could be captured by elites or lost through mismanagement. Traoré's administration must ensure that the structures it is building are resistant not only to external pressure, but also to internal decay. Yet alongside these risks, the potential rewards are enormous. For the first time in its modern history, Burkina Faso is poised to keep the full value of its resources, invest in industries beyond mining, and strengthen its financial independence. The gold reserves being stockpiled could support the stabilization of its currency, enable greater flexibility in trade negotiations, and provide a safety net against global economic shocks. Moreover, Burkina Faso is now emerging as a symbol of what is possible when a nation refuses to accept the status quo. Its success could pave the way for a wave of resource-driven independence across Africa, reshaping the global balance of economic power. For ordinary Burkinabe citizens, this means more than economic statistics. It means the possibility of schools built with national revenue, healthcare funded by domestic wealth, and industries creating jobs not only in cities, but also in rural areas where opportunity has long been scarce. The stakes could not be higher. If Burkina Faso succeeds, it will not just secure its economic future, but potentially spark a broader African movement towards sovereignty and self-reliance. If it fails, critics will point to it as proof that breaking from established financial and trade systems is too costly for smaller nations to bear. Either way, one thing is clear: the old model of dependency is gone. Burkina Faso has set itself on a path that cannot easily be reversed, one defined not by what foreign powers demand, but by what its people envision. Whether that path leads to lasting prosperity or painful lessons will depend on how well the nation manages the delicate balance between ambition and stability, between resistance and cooperation, and between hope and reality. Can Burkina Faso's gold-fueled independence survive external pressure and internal challenges? Let us know in the comment section. Will this rebellion spark a new wave of resource nationalism across Africa? Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If so, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We have decided to bring videos on something nobody talks about: the Black culture, civilization, history, and evidence about how glorious Blacks have been. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.